A very good day to all of our viewers. Welcome to another marriage encounter. We are delighted to be with you on the airways of Second Advent Radio. And of course, if you are following on any of our social media platforms, just the same, I am Dr. Carson Greene, and with me is Pastor Staton Adams, the Family Life Director of the South Leeward Conference. We have been for the last few weeks talking about, well, should I say, the last several months, boundaries in marriage. We began this conversation last year, and this year is approaching its close, and there is still a lot more to talk about in the area of boundaries. More specifically, recently, we have been discussing the idea of when you get to those very difficult problem areas, when you have to give ultimatum to your say, listen, for whatever reason, we can't continue in this situation. And we said when you get to that point last week, Pastor Adams, we were discussing the whole idea of second guessing yourself. You're going to give your spouse an ultimatum, and you're now saying, hey, hold on. Did I make the right decision? Am I sure? You know, you're second guessing yourself. We want to move on from there. But before we do so, good day and welcome, Pastor.
Good day, everybody. Delighted to have you again joining us. How quickly time has flown by. We're almost going to the end of the year. So we want to continue as we've been doing. Invite a friend, invite others to join us because we are live on Marriage Encounter again today.
We wanted this time to have a word of prayer, shall we? Eternal Father and our God, we thank you for the opportunity to share with our friends in Radio Lands and those following on social media. We ask that you will guide our discussions and our deliberations in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Pastor Adams, we have a big area to talk about. So I really, without even reviewing, I want to go straight into it. Because there comes a time when in a relationship, unfortunately, everything that you try for the survival of the relationship seems to fail. The relationship when you realize that your spouse is living out of harmony with the principles of marriage, and you have given warnings, you have given rebuke, you have tried, you have sought counseling, you have given ultimatums, and nothing is changing. And there comes a time when you have to decide, well, I don't want to say, there may come a time, lest people think we're talking about every marriage, you know. There are some marriages that are working well, and we praise God for them. Marriage is still a wonderful thing. It's still a divine institution. It is still blessed, enjoyable. But every now and then, a marriage fails. And sometimes to a point where an individual may have to say, listen, I've tried everything, and the only resort for me is to leave permanently. If, for example, a woman is unfaithful to her husband, and I'm using this example just to illustrate the point, if for a woman, a relationship outside of the marriage, and the husband is willing to forgive, he's willing to get counseling, and she says, okay, I'm going to do better, but she keeps repeating it and repeating it. He may decide, listen, I definitely cannot live under these circumstances. I'm going to leave permanently. And there comes a time when there's permanence. This is a big topic, so we want to talk about this whole concept. Can we begin by talking about the fact that divorce is not a first resort, but a last resort?
Right. It's indeed a big one. And there are many opinions on this. I think I heard one of my professors says you fix it, live with it, or get out of it. Those three options you have.
Okay.
You live with it, you fix it, or you get out of it. And like you rightly said, you have tried everything possible. All the ultimatums you have given, the person does not want to respect boundaries, doesn't want to change. And for your own personal well-being and emotional and psychological and physical well-being, you have to come to the point, because it's not just a matter of making a decision to exit a relationship, but how you can be affected and impacted while you are there, and the situation is affecting you in those ways. And you have given the example. So we rightly said that divorce is not the first option. We try everything to save the marriage, and I am always for that, particularly if there are children involved, because all the research literature is showing it not only impacts the couple who is involved, but you have children, they particularly, in fact, they are impacted much more depending on what age they're at when the separation or breakup has taken place. And there's extensive literature, longitudinal studies are showing how children from divorced marriages or families are affected, are impacted. It's just an I I think I said that the last time. I just go back and sometimes get me so emotional that this is the doing of the evil one, because he wants to destroy this institution, marriage and the family that God has set up with an intention where there will be love and harmony and intimacy. That was also God's intention. But this adversary has intruded his presence, separating men and women, boys and girls, ruining the family, breaking up the home. He's the real enemy. And so we can see it, because now the global statistics on this issue is so terrible. At least the last time they said 2 out of 3. And that also includes Christian marriages. We're talking about global statistics that include Christian marriages. So we say that do our utmost, try it. And that's why we've been saying over and on this program, get the education, get the right start, set the right foundation. If things are not going fine, get help, and get help quickly, like last week. Don't wait, because we want to save the marriage at all costs. But sometimes because people have not moved with the time, they were not aware, maybe the awareness and the type of intervention and how quickly that should have done, the delay can be dangerous. So sometimes it comes to the point where the whole thing is irreparable, and that's the logical end. The bad patterns, I mean, and like, we know that it can be done, because as a Christian counselor, I always believe that there's another power that is working, which is the Holy Spirit, the power of God, that can change some things. But the people who are involved must be willing to change themselves, because that's really fundamentally, that is what it's about. I have to change something. So you may change partners. A separation takes place, the marriages go on, the people are separated, divorced. You may change partner, but if you don't change you as a person, you can repeat that cycle. And that's why the statistics show that second marriages has a higher failure rate. Third marriages has a higher failure rate still. And children who are out of divorced marriages are more likely to divorce, to separate themselves, because that pattern tend to persist. That is what the literature is showing. I mean, you're not absolutely bound by your past, but as far as the research literature is showing, that is what it is saying to us. So that is why I agree with you that that should be the last option. When everything else failed, we have tried our best, we have done everything, and then, well, maybe we can't do anything else. But that's the painful part.
It is interesting, Pastor, because we live in a what I want to say sometimes an instant world. There's fast food, instant this, instant that,
Quick
and
fix, quick fix.
and perhaps individuals seem somehow to lack the discipline to work through issues. Some issues require time. Now, if you have a couple that is married for 20 years and they're experiencing challenges, that's 20 years of issues that bring them to a point. It can't be fixed overnight. You have to be willing to take time to work on certain issues. One of the things that, for example, I have discovered in carrying out of marriage counseling, you're dealing with a couple, and you're going through therapy, and things begin to look up, And then all of a sudden they think the problem is solved. They don't want to go through the process because, okay, they're talking to one another again, things are getting fine. And you try to say to them, listen, this is a process. If you don't work through, chances are you're going to revert back, you know.
Yes.
So this instant mentality that people have, they want a quick fix. Marriage is relational. Relational issues are not easy issues. And one has to, as we have shared on this program, examine their own lives, look at their character. Sometimes their character defects. Sometimes there are issues coming from your childhood days. You know, there may have been emotional issues that were not dealt with, abuse and other things that were not dealt with that you have to deal with. And these things take time. But we really do want to emphasize that, uh, and let me begin this way. Marriage is intended by God to last a lifetime. When you get married, it should be with the intention, as we say in the vows, until death do us part. Now, if that is not your, if that is not your approach, then you're starting wrong. There are too many people who are going into the relationship, and some people even have what we call prenuptial agreements. You know, they're going into the relationship thinking, okay, this is, if this doesn't work out, this is how we're going to do it. You don't want to plan fail. You want to be able to it requires a certain degree of risk, but it's a faith venture. And so you go in knowing that difficulties may arise, but we're going to work them out. The marriage vow says for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer. And we have to be willing to work through those kinds of issues. Now, we are not saying that you have to take anything that comes. This is why we are talking about boundaries. Boundaries suggest that there has to be responsibility and accountability in the relationship. And when you can hold one another accountable, then you're going to have success in the relationship. It is not a free ride. It is not anything goes. There are rules, regulations, there are principles that have to be followed. And we made the point some weeks ago that marriage is for adults. You have to be responsible. You can't be married and be living irresponsibly. And so one has to determine, what do I really want? When you get, which is why we should not rush into relationships, which is why you should take your time. You should make sure that this is the individual that you want to spend the rest of your life with. And it can't be just the outward appearance. It can't just be how the person looks at 21. You know, the young lady may look dashing. She may have the right curves and the right proportions and that kind of stuff. But if you are marrying just for the external, your marriage is not going to work. You know, you have to look beyond that. How well does this person communicate? What do they say when they open up their mouths? You know, what is their character? What are their values? I like to talk about values. You know, if you do not have shared values, you are going to prove incompatible. And so I like to suggest that, you know, examine your values, see the extent to which they match up with one another, and plan by the grace of God to work on the issues as they develop. Put in the hard work, and you're going to get the positive results.
But as one of the premier educators of family life, Dr. Johnson Trotman would say that as you make the decision, even while you are signing that register, while you're saying that vow, you have to make a mental decision that you're in this for the long haul, providing that you have examined closely, as you have said. And I like what you said, that you don't be in a hurry, because the worst mistake to make is a marital mistake, because nobody can cause you the emotional pain. And I've been to the cemetery as a pastor for the past 37 going 38 years. I've left a lot of people's family members there, my own family members. I've seen pain, I've seen grief, but I think the most difficult pain I've seen in my career is having to deal with the pain and difficulty of a separation of family. Children are involved, and it's like it's a death. One author said that separation, divorce, is a death in the civilization. Not just that couple separates, but at least 40 other persons are affected. You go through the same process of grief, like when somebody dies, and it can be very devastating, years beyond the separation. You see, so you have to count the cost and make sure that you're making the right decision. And as you were commenting, it came to my mind what the Chinese proverb says, because if we enter marriage, even though we are compatible and that is what marriageability of a person, and so the more compatible the couple are on the onset of marriage, the more likely they are. Notice my word. The more likely, because marriage is work, right? The more likely they are to succeed in marriage. But we also say that people should not think that marriage will not be difficult, they will not be up days, they'll not be down days, there are going to be challenges. And so marriage is not like a happily ever after affair. So some people enter marriage hoping that, well, it's going to be a happily ever after affair. And that's the reason why whenever something develops, they're ready to quit and not putting the work and deal with it. I mean, I have told people, and I like to share from my own experience. I mean, on my first 3 years of marriage, there have been challenges. Just the mere juggling between career and home. I had the wrong orientation. I didn't have this kind of education that I have now, and there were real challenging days in the first 3 years of marriage, you see. But you have to remember the commitment that you have, because the commitment to God it's a covenant, is a threefold covenant, right? Is a covenant between yourself, your spouse, and God. A covenant between you and your spouse, and the covenant between you, your spouse, and society, because marriage really is for the stability of society. That's what God intended. So whenever a marriage goes apart, separate, divorce, society is affected in all of these ways, in many ways. And I said at least 40 other persons are affected. You see, so we have to consider the whole picture and know that it is not wrong to get help. It is not something wrong when there's a disagreement, or your spouse cannot see eye to eye on this issue. At least your premarital counsel should have prepared you to deal with that you're not always going to see eye to eye. There are going to be some challenges, difficult times, and I like what you said, because if you're married for the wrong reasons, then you wouldn't want to stay. You have to be married for the right reasons. And there are actually two. Marriage is supposed to glorify God because He's the author of the relationship. And you have to be absolutely sure it is love, right? Absolutely sure that it's love. All the other things that people get married for, like how the woman look as you described there, and what you can get, and financial security and all of that. Those are just the blessings of marriage, procreation, children. Those are just the blessings of marriage. But the real reason for marriage is, one, God has to be glorified. Number two, that you have to be absolutely sure it is love, because a lot of other things can fail, as they do. And when those fail, only those two things can keep you. The commitment, the love, the covenant love that you have for each other, and the power and presence of God.
Now, very wise counsel indeed. We want to share at this point that God's original purpose for marriage is that the couple lives in harmony. Marriage is supposed to be a harmonious, loving, thriving relationship. If you are distressed, if there is abuse, if there is um if there is violence, we talk about intimate partner violence, if there is shaming and blaming, and you are being treated as a thing as opposed to a person, if your spouse is unfaithful, if your spouse is violent, I'm just using various scenarios. If you're living in hell, that is not healthy. And you don't want, nobody should be married to get tortured. And so we are careful to say that we want divorce to be a last resort. You should explore all the options available. And as marriage counselors, as Christian marriage counselors, we seek to work towards meaningful, wholesome reconciliation where you live in a harmonious relationship. But the reality is, there are times when all of the intervention do not work, because at the end of the day, individuals have to make a determination whether they're willing to humble themselves. I want to talk a little bit about attitude. Tell yourself that you're not perfect. It is important for you to do some self-assessment and to realize that you're not perfect. You know, as human beings, we have a tendency to see all the imperfections in our partner and we see none in ourselves. You have to humble yourself. When you pray, ask the Lord to show you, what am I contributing to this relationship that is not healthy? What are the errors that I have? If you can't look yourself in a mirror, I'm not talking about a physical mirror now, but if you can't do this self-assessment, you know, and see and be willing to admit, if you can say to your spouse, honey, sweetheart, darling, whatever terminology you use, um, give me a correct analysis of who I am. What are the challenges you see with me in terms of our relationship, etc. And then let your spouse share freely and do a reflection on those things, and trust your spouse. I've discovered, Pastor, that there's nobody that is going to be as honest as our spouse with us. You know, and if you take that assessment and you look at it and say, Lord, how can I be better? How can I be more satisfying to my spouse? How can I be more pleasing to you? The humility that is required for a successful relationship a lot of times is lacking in the individual. So I want to talk about recognizing that you're not perfect, be willing to admit that you have flaws, you have errors, you have imperfections. Begin there, and that's a positive road that you will walk by the grace of God. I did mute you, so if you can just unmute.
Oh, and that's the reason why it is necessary that every marriage, we should have some time of reviewing, to see how we are, right? Because every marriage needs repair at some point in time. You see, for me to grow, I have to let some things go. While you were talking, for me to grow, I have to let some things go. And that is why that matter of your own personal self-evaluation is necessary, right? And you ask your spouse, and that is why you must have that. Like every 6 months or every year on anniversary, we're gonna do this brutal, dishonest. We have to be brutally honest with ourselves, you know. How am I doing? You know, what are the growth areas? You know, what are the defects that I have that I need to work on, that I need to intentionally look at, you see. So yes, all of those things is help to grow. You grow the marriage by growing yourself in these particular areas. You see, you grow the marriage by growing yourself, and like I'm repeating, for you to grow, you have got to let some things go. And therefore, if your spouse points out to you that this is an issue, this is a problem area, you have got to do what it is to help to grow in that area and let those things go. You know, and as we said time and time, it may be you can probably deal that by yourself with the help of your spouse, and sometimes you might probably need a counselor to help you deal with whatever it is. But whatever it is you have to do, because that is so very, very crucial. We have to look at ourselves, and that is what deceased to family life educator Martin Burrow would say that as well. It is God, the spouse, and then yourself. And while you are looking at yourself, you have to say to yourself, what changes, what adjustment do I need to make to be a better spouse to my husband or to my wife? You see, because when you are doing that, you are improving that triangle of success, and you are also improving the relationship, right? Am I really reflecting the character that I should reflect? And I like that triangle: myself, God, my spouse, and then myself, because we have to look to him to see if we are resembling him. These are the traits we must bring: love and forgiveness and care and altruism and all of these things, you know. We have to do Christian marriage. Um, but the principle apply to any relationship, because we are all emotional beings, and we have that capability, right? And that's why we are in the image of the Most High God, right? So that self-evaluation and looking at yourself critically, honestly, is so very, very crucial. If both persons do that, I believe a lot of marriages and relationships will be saved.
Definitely. Definitely. Now, I wanted to touch on the matter of what if all else fails and you have to go to the divorce? We only have 2 minutes, so I can't go into any details of that now. So next week, we're going to address that. What if you have to get a divorce? What I want to say here is that you must not be prepared, and I like to be very clear on this one. You must not be prepared to live in torture. You know, you don't want to empower your spouse to be abusive. You don't want to lose your life because you're married. You owe it
Yeah.
yourself to your children, etc. And you know, some people live in shame and misery and pain because they don't want society to think, oh, they're divorced. So, you know, people look on divorce in a certain light. So next week we want to talk about what happens if you get divorced, how you can find healing, how you can find comfort. Um,
Mhm.
we have to stay next week because we have only about another minute here. Um, there comes a time when, you know, there was just too much pain, there was just too much agony in this relationship. Yes, God's intention is that marriage lasts a lifetime, but God also intends that that marriage that lasts a lifetime is a happy and fulfilling and meaningful marriage. And if that is not the case, you should not be living in torture. And so the idea is for you to find liberation, and we will talk about that next week. This is where we have to stay for today, unfortunately. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, Marriage Encounter at slcadventist.org. That is Marriage Encounter at slcadventist.org. Be sure to join us next week when we will talk about divorce and what if you end up in a situation like that, unfortunately. May God bless you until next week, same time.
Ba-ba-ba-bum. 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 Ba-ba-ba-bum.